Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. So yesterday we talked about the COVID hellscape that Florida has become, sort of almost like as a feature of how Republican Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has handled the COVID situation there, really flouting, not flaunting, flouting all conventional wisdom and public health guidelines almost from the very beginning of the pandemic. Now, we also have these other Republicans who they've been vaccinated, and if asked, they'll say go and get vaccinated. But for the most part throughout the pandemic, they've played the freedom and liberty game and mostly sucked up to President Donald Trump. And one such example is Republican Senator from representing the state of South Carolina, Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham has now tested positive for COVID-19. And the timing of that positive test suggests that because of a boat ride he went on Senator Joe Manchin's boat, it may even be a sort of mini super spreader event. So let's first look at what exactly is going on. Axios reporting Senator Lindsey Graham tests positive for COVID-19. Senator Lindsey said yesterday he tested positive despite being vaccinated. Graham emphasized that the mildness of his symptoms is due to being vaccinated. If he had been unvaccinated, his symptoms would be far worse, he said. That's his speculation, but certainly reasonable thing to think. It appears Graham may have exposed a number of other senators to the virus after he attended a weekend get-together hosted by Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, on the latter's houseboat, CNN reports. Senator Manchin is fully vaccinated and following CDC guidelines for those exposed to a COVID-positive individual. Senators Mark Kelly, Jackie Rosen were also at the bipartisan gathering and are now following CDC guidelines for persons exposed. Senators Catherine Cortez Masto, John Thune, and Chris Coons, all of whom are fully vaccinated, also attended the boat gathering. Thune has already received his test results and tested negative for COVID. Senate Democrats have gone back to holding virtual meetings in light of the news of Graham's positive test. So I haven't really thought about Lindsey Graham for some time, but remember that crazy situation where he refused to be COVID tested before a debate with, I believe it was Jamie Harrison, who was running against him for the Senate in 2020. And so they basically installed a plastic shield around Lindsey Graham. Sometimes you'll see at big concerts, the drummer will have a plastic shield so that the drumming doesn't get picked up by the microphones of other instruments and people on stage. They did the equivalent, but with Lindsey, it was a COVID glass, a plexiglass or plastic barrier because he didn't want to be tested. So the point here is Lindsey Graham has been relatively clear over the last 2 weeks, including now with his positive test. Thanks to being vaccinated, this is probably less serious than it otherwise would have been. Go and get vaccinated. It's important to be vaccinated. But for basically the totality of 2020, he sucked up to Trump and insisted Trump was doing a good job on COVID, despite Trump's job on COVID being one of the worst in the world, particularly for what we would call one of the wealthier countries. Refused to be tested as part of his freedom and all of this other stuff. And now he may have been involved in a potential mini spreader event. Now, again, the senators on Joe Manchin's boat Saturday were, of course, Joe Manchin himself, Mark Kelly, Chris Coons, John Thune. I mentioned Jackie Rosen, Senator Cantwell from Washington, and Senator Cortez Masto from Nevada, and hopefully all of them will test negative. So there's been a really interesting, at this point, it's really depressing, actually, that this is the way it is. But signal and the absence of signal both are being computed the same way by the anti-maskers and the anti-vaxxers. So you would think, oh, okay, Lindsey tested positive despite being vaccinated and his symptoms are mild. So that should lead people to say, I should get vaccinated so that if I test positive, my symptoms will be mild. The problem is that you'll have some people in his base who will say, oh, He was vaccinated and tested positive, therefore the vaccine doesn't work. That would be one incorrect interpretation of what happened here. And they'll say, so I won't get vaccinated because it didn't prevent Lindsey from testing positive. The other one is, well, he tested positive and it's mild, so therefore I don't have to go and get vaccinated, ignoring the reality that there's a good chance, we don't know for sure, but there's a good chance that Lindsey's case is milder, and hopefully it remains milder, because he was vaccinated. So to you and me, we would say this is the virtue of the vaccines working. Lindsey is, I don't know, he must be around between 65 and 70, I would guess 67, something like that. He is at a higher chance of a more serious case. He says it's like a cold right now. It's mild and he's vaccinated. So this is the virtue of getting vaccinated. Other people will simply find in that what they want. Either you don't need a vaccine against something that's mild, or you don't need a vaccine that doesn't work because he tested positive despite being vaccinated. So unfortunately, it's not going to be the big boon that you and I might hope. Now, hopefully he recovers. And then he encourages people to get vaccinated, and at least some of them listen and understand that this change we've seen from people like, Mitch McConnell claims he's been for the vaccine all along. He got vaccinated. He hasn't been loudly for the vaccine all along. Fox News, everybody turning pro-vaccine now. The reason, in part, we know that the Trump administration early didn't really do that much about COVID is they saw it mostly affecting Democratic blue cities. New York City, Boston, San Francisco, Los Angeles, etc. And so we know because of the conversations between Jared Kushner and Trump, they just weren't worrying about it that much because it was mostly affecting their political opponents, adversaries, enemies, or whatever the case may be. Now it is a very different situation. Now the number one COVID hellscape in the country is Florida, with often 20 or 30% of the entire country's cases are happening in Florida each day. Hospitalizations, record in Florida, over 10,000, highest of the entire pandemic. COVID case rates growing twice as quickly on average in red counties that voted Trump versus blue counties that voted Biden. So they realize now they are the ones at risk of losing voters because of that political reality. That's why they're changing their perspective. Hopefully, Lindsey testing positive, Phil Valentine, the radio host who was anti-vax, saying, get vaccinated, I'm now on a ventilator. Hopefully this gets people vaccinated. But unfortunately, I think for many of the anti-vaxxers, they will see this and say, oh, this is more reason not to get vaccinated. Let's look at the latest. I mean, it's like to call it a conspiracy theory is almost like too much because it suggests there's some theory and there really isn't. A Newsmax reporter suggested during a recent White House press briefing that the entire Delta variant might be almost like a false flag. It might not really be a thing. This took place during an outrageously chaotic press briefing. This press briefing. So let me set this up for you because the entire scene was absolute and total bedlam. Jen Psaki did not hold this press briefing. This press briefing was held by the Deputy Press Secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, who did overall a very good job. Towards the end of the press conference, there was this idea. They do this every once in a while. They'll bring on a reporter via video conference to ask a question. Sometimes it's like a rural reporter. Once it was someone from Alaska. Okay, so they try to bring on this reporter remotely. And there's just massive technical issues. Like we, the viewers at home, could hear the reporter, but I guess in the room, they couldn't hear the reporter. And then the reporter was talking at the same time. Newsmax reporter starts talking about the Delta variant and it gets nuts. So I'm still wondering why Newsmax is even in the White House press briefing room. I still can't fully understand how that works. We've heard before, oh, someone has lost a seat, but they're still in there at the back yelling questions. It's not totally transparent to me. There's some opacity here. OK, but let's get to it. And again, I'm warning you, it's total and complete chaos in the room. Like it's really hard to figure out what's going on and what's even being said. But let's make an attempt to figure it out.
Test when that is the dominant strain in the area when people just test whether they're COVID positive.
Well, we don't.
OK, so the question there. And by the way, I don't know if you saw, seems to, so far the mask is off the nose and soon you'll see the mask actually come all the way down. The question is, how can you say the Delta variant is spreading when people get tested, it's just, are you positive or are you negative for COVID? That's the question. It's sort of like, is the Delta variant even really a thing?
People just test whether they're COVID positive.
Well, we don't test it. We don't test it. We listen to public health and scientists, and they tell us that it's the Delta variant.
Explain their process for that.
I don't even understand. Why would they explain?
Explain their process of how they're determining it's the Delta variant.
I mean, that's what they are telling us. I laid out I laid out how contagious it was, and I laid out why we needed to act.
This is so frustrating. I'm with you guys.
On the Delta variant, I laid out
but a lot of
why.
The answers we get is because they say so, without a lot of.
Well, they're the experts. It's not just day.
So, I guess what she's saying is, how do we know if something is the Delta variant? If I have symptoms and I go and get tested and it's, sir, you're positive, right?
Sure.
Is it Delta or is it not Delta? The explanation is you sequence the virus, you get a cohort that's representative of the population, and you test them and you sequence the virus. You don't do this with everybody. And sort of like when you do a political poll, you don't interview every American. You get a representative sample. And so the idea would be if 40% of the sample believes something, then you can extrapolate that roughly 40% of the country believes something if your sample is good. It's the same thing with the sequencing. There are test cohorts. And if they see that 80% of the test cohort is the Delta variant, then you can say, well, Delta's probably 80% of the country's positive tests. Generally speaking, if your sample is good, like she seems to be saying, why isn't Karine Jean-Pierre explaining epidemiology to her? So therefore, it must all be some kind of false flag. It continues.
Hey, these are scientists. These are experts. I just said that. Hold on one second. I just said that
Pathetic.
Dr. Lewinsky said just recently in her 20-year career, she had never seen a variant that was so contagious. So this is 20 years of her career.
I actually don't think Karine Jean-Pierre is doing that great of a job here, unfortunately.
So this is absolutely a major problem that we are trying to deal with. That's why we heard from the president yesterday. That's why we keep talking about people need to get vaccinated. So that is the way that we're trying to move in this administration, making sure that we are protecting people here, making sure that we're dealing with this pandemic in a way that is effective, and that's how we're going to move forward. I'll take another question. Go ahead.
So, what's frustrating about this is, first of all, it doesn't really matter what you call it, like whatever you call it, even if you don't even talk about variants, it has gotten way more contagious. Call it whatever you want. You don't need to sequence every case. You need to sequence a representative sample. If you want to say, wow, Delta's now dominant in Florida, you're not sequencing every individual. You're saying, let's take a cohort, and it used to be that 5% of the cohort was Delta, and now 80%, so that it's becoming dominant. The logic here from the reporter is sort of like, if you've not exactly explained how gravity works, then I should be able to fly. Like maybe people can fly because you're not explaining to me exactly how gravity works. If you've not tested gravity, maybe it doesn't actually apply here. Maybe it's made up. And Karine's expression, it's funny. It's sort of like a combination of confusion and pure hatred. It would have been better for her to be a little more prepared, because to you and me, we're like, oh my God, it's like, this is not an epidemiology briefing. We're testing a cohort and that's sort of it. To the conspiracy theorists, that comes off like the Newsmax reporter made a really good point. And there's this incredible arrogance in there about like, if the Newsmax reporter doesn't understand it, how could anyone? And therefore, is it even definitely true? And it's like a combination of belief based on ignorance and Dunning-Kruger. They don't understand the science. They assume that they do. And therefore, they assume that if the science was good, they would understand it. But they don't. And so when they encounter some kind of information that challenges their preconceptions, or they don't get it, like you get a positive or a negative when you get tested. So how could we know anything about Delta? Then all of a sudden it reinforces their beliefs that they shouldn't trust what's going on. It's sort of like, hey, Karine, can you explain the field of epidemiology in the press briefing room? Oh, you can't? Well, then there must be no Delta. And with a lot of this, it's like start from the way I would suggest dealing with people like this in your private life. And we've talked about this before. Start from, are you open to the idea that you might not know everything and I might not know everything? Oh, okay, good. If you're open to that, then we can go to the next thing. What reason do you have to doubt that there is a different variant now than at the beginning? Like, do you have general doubt about the fact that viruses change over time? Do you have specific doubt about how this, right? And really try to break down where the disconnect is. But everything just seems totally confusing to this reporter. She doesn't know how to wear a mask. It shouldn't shock us that she also doesn't understand. You test a cohort and then you extrapolate from that. It's really a sad state of affairs, my friends. Not sad is the fact that we are now under 2 weeks from our 16th anniversary, 16 years since the start of the David Pakman Show. We'll be doing a one-day membership special on Monday, August 16th. I would love for you to sign up on that day. It's going to be an incredible day. It's going to be an historic day. You can sign up for our newsletter at davidpakman.com. And then Monday morning on the 16th, you'll get an email telling you how to sign up at a huge discount. What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist. And what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month. And you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video. So I've been taking some shots from the audience about, I guess some people in the audience think I'm too empathetic. I'm too empathetic when it comes to people that haven't gotten vaccinated and then get very sick or sometimes die. Yeah, I feel bad for those people. If you want to attack me for being too empathetic, I will take it. It doesn't seem like the worst character flaw to have. But I have an example for you today of someone who is apparently in a really bad position. And I don't really feel bad. And maybe now people will be mad that I don't feel bad. But the latest report is that Rudy Giuliani is reportedly close to broke. And now Donald Trump seems to have cut him off as well. There's a very interesting article in Mother Jones, which says, having raised more money than anyone else in the Republican Party so far this year, new filings show Donald Trump is flush with cash. Now, later we'll talk about what he's doing with some of that cash, and it's very grifty. Absolutely swimming in it. But even as the money flows in, the former president is reportedly stiffing one of his fiercest allies and loyal political surrogates, Rudy Giuliani, as the former New York mayor becomes increasingly ensnared in a federal investigation, reportedly costing him millions in legal fees. Here's the latest on the apparent fallout between the two men. Maggie Haberman tweeted, Giuliani allies are looking at the Trump money, even if it is an $82 million, and are aghast that Trump isn't helping Giuliani with legal fees. Trump doesn't care about anybody when they are no longer useful to him. That's always the case. It's no different with Rudy. Maggie goes on to tweet, Giuliani's friends say he is close to broke, and his interview with Melissa Russo makes clear he knows he's in legal jeopardy. Going on to say Trump aides have been clear they see no mechanism for paying Rudy's legal bills that isn't problematic for Trump, and they think Giuliani took actions as a lawyer should have known were problematic. Strange phrasing, but I understand what it says, even if the client wanted it. That's particularly worrisome for Giuliani, whose legal defense fund has effectively failed to raise anything in his fight against the federal probe into whether he worked as an unregistered lobbyist for Ukrainian officials. Giuliani, who was recently suspended from practicing law in New York, is also facing a separate lawsuit from Dominion Voting Systems over his relentless election lies. And despite his penchant for conspiracy theories and misinformation, it appears, as Haberman notes, that Giuliani does seem to understand the gravity of his precarious legal situation. So this is a disaster for Rudy, but it is really a deserved one, quite frankly. I mean, this guy's an adult. He was a competent lawyer. He didn't so much fall for something as he made some kind of calculation that he was going to get involved and defend everything Trump does, no matter what, and even go above and beyond, not just while Trump was trying to be reelected. Trump loses, and then Rudy becomes the front person, the most prominent person going around the country spreading COVID and also spreading bogus hypotheses about how Trump actually won. He turned himself into a pawn for a psychopathic, narcissistic egomaniac that was Donald Trump. How else was this ultimately going to end? And a little bit later, we're going to talk about new reports that Donald Trump has been funneling the grifted 80 million or 72 million or whatever he raised over the last few months to fight the election results. He's been funneling it into his own businesses, but he's not going to pay Rudy Giuliani's legal fees. So what options does Rudy have? Close to broke. Couple things that come to mind. One, I don't know if you remember, but there were a few instances where Rudy mentioned that he has an insurance policy. He said that he has this insurance policy, which is some kind of evidence of Trump wrongdoing, and that if he were to have a problem with Trump, he would have this evidence of some kind as an insurance policy. Did he really have that? We don't know. Did he have it, but maybe it's not really of value anymore because it's part of what was seized when his home and office were raided by federal authorities a month or two ago? We don't know. Is Rudy going to have to flip? Although then it actually raises questions. It's complicated because Rudy was Trump's lawyer, but he was really only like his TV lawyer until after the election. Rudy actually started filing motions in courts. But then Trump sort of distanced, and it's not clear whether that was really a representation. The point is, if Rudy were to think about flipping, and I don't know that he's thinking of that, but if he were, is there a question of attorney-client privilege somewhere in there? I don't know. But it shouldn't shock any of us that Rudy didn't end up getting 20 million a day from Trump, who notoriously stiffs everybody that works for him. So Rudy is in a bad place. It's hard for me not to feel a little bad. The guy's nearly 80. He may be broke. I feel a little bad. I do. But this is really of his own doing. It's not even like Rudy, an anti-vax person who's the victim of disinformation propaganda all around them. They go to work and it's anti-vax propaganda. They go on Facebook, it's anti-vax propaganda. Then they get sick with COVID. I see them really as mostly victims, although they are also perpetrators by continuing to signal boost the anti-vax propaganda. Rudy is not really a victim here. Rudy's just a lawyer, and he made a bad call. He made the wrong decision, and now he's going to have to apparently pay the price for it. Hey, I'm going to show you some video that I would get the kids out of the room. This is extremely disturbing video of Pastor Greg Locke from the Global Vision Bible Church in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. Now, the video that I am going to play for you, one, it's politically outrageous and crazy. I also don't know if this guy is having a medical incident during this video. I don't know. I'm not a neurologist, but is this a stroke? Is this guy? Because this is out of this world crazy video during which Greg Locke starts screaming to his congregation. By the way, the services are taking place in a circus tent, which you will see if you're watching, which is fitting. He starts screaming at his congregation not to get vaccinated and that he was right about everything. What he's talking about, I don't know, but let's take a look. Wow.
I've been right about all of it!
Whoa.
We've been right about all of it! Woo! Yes!
And you can see there that it is literally in a circus tent, a striped circus tent.
Yes! These wicked fools don't win in the end. They don't win in the end. So all this fear bull crap is that. It is bull crap. Say amen. I know you've never been to a church where a pastor told you to say amen after I said bull crap. It's better than what I want to say.
I'm like, is this a psychotic break? Is there any context outside of a lot of us see this and we say it doesn't matter that it's in a church. This is mental illness. Is there any context outside of a church where you would see this and not say, whoa, 72-hour psych hold?
I call it real BS, biblical stupidity. Biblical stupidity. So I know I wasn't going to say nothing about it, but I think I feel froggy enough. I'm going to jump right now and just say this.
Whoa.
I am not apologizing for what I said on this platform last week.
Okay.
The Delta variant was nonsense then. It is nonsense now. You will not wear masks in this church. You will not wear masks in this church. I'm telling you right now, do not get vaccinated. Do not get vaccinated. I don't care what you think about me.
He's getting a standing ovation for this, folks. There's a pastor, in a circus tent getting a standing ovation for saying no masks allowed and you will not get vaccinated.
I don't need your money. I don't need your hand clap. I don't need more people on social media to follow me.
Socha.
I ain't following along with it. Joe Biden's days are numbered. I said they're numbered. I've told you the whole time this election was fraudulent.
Okay, this is a cult. This is a terrifying, terrifying cult. Even the term pastor is like, what? It's more like cult leader. Remember, that's a tax-exempt church. Churches are allowed to be tax-exempt. They're not supposed to do politics. He said the election was stolen. That's politics. He should lose his tax exemption. Will the IRS investigate? They're not investigating nearly enough. And then the anti-vax, non-science nonsense. This same guy a week ago threatened to kick people out if they wore a mask to his church. Same guy in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. Tennessee, really low vaccination rate as of yesterday, 39.2%. The national average, it's about 50%. The country is vaccinated about 50%. Tennessee is more than 10 points below that at 39%. There are states, Vermont's at 67, Massachusetts 64, Maine 63. Tennessee is very lowly vaccinated, very highly infected, and you have a tax-exempt church pastor saying, do not get vaccinated. Biden didn't really win. How is it that can be tax exempt? How is it? Now on the other end, who thinks this guy's been vaccinated? I genuinely don't know. Could he be vaccinated, but he knows that these are the types of rants that play to his audience's fantasies and delusions? Because a lot of these anti-vax members of Congress that we've found out about, they are vaccinated, or at least some of them are vaccinated. Some of them don't want to say one way or the other. I think we know why. Absolute insanity. And, when we try to understand how do some people in this country believe the stuff they believe? If you grow up around that's your one social thing where you go to a church in a circus tent and that's what you see. And then all your coworkers are going to that. And your parents growing up tell you what you see in the media is not true. What you read in history books isn't true. That's how we end up with the problem we have in this country. So we'll have more on that on our show Instagram. Make sure you're following us on Instagram at David Pakman Show. Coming up after the break, I'll be speaking with attorney Peter Mougey, that $26 billion lawsuit against the opioid distributors and manufacturers. Peter Mougey is one of the attorneys who negotiated it, and we will talk to him next. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time, and plenty of other awesome membership perks, go to joinpacman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpacman.com. Today, I'm going to be speaking with attorney Peter Mougey, who's a senior partner at Levin Papantonio Rafferty and also chair of their Securities and Business Litigation Department. We're going to be talking about this proposed $26 billion settlement against some of the pharmaceutical industry's biggest players. Some of the details which we talked about earlier this week. Peter, it's great to have you on, first of all.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David. Appreciate it.
So talk to us about, first, this is an opioid-related settlement, just to remind our audience, as we talked about earlier this week. Talk to us about the genesis of this. How did these four organizations first become the subject of this case? How long has this been going on?
I'm going to put those in two different buckets, and we'll talk about the manufacturers quickly.
Yeah.
The manufacturer, which is the J&J story. J&J is both a manufacturer and an importer of raw opium, and they marketed and promoted the opium here in the U.S., similar to a Purdue story. And those cases started earlier. The beginning of the manufacturer cases was 2014-ish. The distributor cases, which are the big three, and account for 21 billion of the 26 billion, really didn't start getting filed by the local governments until late 2016, beginning 2017. And their responsibilities, while overlapping with the manufacturers, are a little different. They have an obligation to review every order, whether it's suspicious because it's a large size, frequency, pattern, and they're supposed to halt shipment and do due diligence. They didn't do it. That's simply their responsibility under the federal regs and why they're on the hook for the 21 billion.
So in general, when people talk about opioids, you can look at essentially any part of the chain of how these ultimately get to consumers and find concerning behavior. So you could look at doctors and overprescribing for a period of time, although in some places that has been mitigated, at least to some degree. You can talk about the manufacturers in terms of the clinical trials, sometimes being accused of misrepresenting how long the medications are good for in order to justify FDA approval as being better than what's already out there. You can talk about distributors using sales reps to encourage the purchase and prescription of more. Like at every point, there are things that you can find that go wrong.
You could even blame the DEA.
Yeah.
I mean, there's enough finger pointing to go around. You're absolutely right.
So my question, Peter, is in this case, with regard to the four companies in question, what is the alleged wrongdoing that you were going after in the case?
Well, the distributors and the manufacturers, but primarily the distributors, are charged under federal law with designing a system to identify orders of unusual size, frequency, or pattern. We'll call those suspicious orders. And once they flag a suspicious order, they are required to halt the order and perform due diligence before they shipped it. And we have been able to track their system that they were supposed to design going back decades. And suffice it to say, until 2013, 14, 15, there really was virtually no system in place. So the runaway growth of the opiate epidemic was driven in large part that opiate pills were just flying out the front door with no oversight. And that's what they were supposed to do, and the reason why they're on the hook. Now, in 14, 15, 16, it got better, but it still really wasn't fixed. And until this injunctive relief in the settlement agreement that requires them to create a clearinghouse spotting red flags run by a third party, I think we'll finally get to some real meaningful red flag test on the distributor side. The manufacturers are a little different in that they have the same responsibilities, but a little further up the food chain, and that it's very difficult for a manufacturer to stop a shipment from a distributor. But they're also supposed to be performing due diligence and reviewing inside of this closed system for suspicious orders. But what we found is that the manufacturers went out and educated doctors on the lack of addictiveness of the pills, and they were safe, and the information coming from the manufacturers was often misleading. So overlapping, but a little bit different on the manufacturer themes or side of the case.
Is it fair to say right now that the nature of the opioid crisis in the United States is not quite as severe as it was when some of these cases started, or is that the wrong perspective?
Wrong perspective. It's actually worse. So what's happened now is we have this whole generation of primarily 20 to 40-year-olds that are addicted to pills. And if we cut the spigot off of pills, the addictive nature of opium, and we've known this for hundreds of years, going back to, we've had multiple, wars over opium. We've had opium problems here in the United States going back to the 70s with heroin. So what we've seen now is we've started to ratchet down the number of pills, is that heroin and fentanyl has just spiked. They're totally inversely correlated. Pills go down, heroin and fentanyl go up. And as a result, last year, deaths were 30% higher than they were the year before, related to opiate overdoses. So we are not anywhere near out of the problem zone.
These cases take years in many cases. They can be very expensive, even from the standpoint of the law firms that are carrying these cases out. Can you talk a little bit about exactly what your role was within this? Because these are major undertakings with a ton of lawyers doing different things.
I'm really proud to be part of this whole operation, but our firm formed a consortium of law firms, meaning a group of law firms, a West Virginia law firm, a Dallas firm, and we were the architects of the distributor case. We were the first ones in the country that filed the distributor cases. Almost 70% of the cases in the first year we filed, we were the architects behind the distributor case. And just as importantly, we were the group of firms that recovered the ARCOS database. And the ARCOS database tracks every single pill manufactured in the U.S., shipped to a distributor, and then shipped to a pharmacy. We were able to track every one of those pills, and then we designed a red flag system that we put on top of every one of those pills in the U.S. So when you saw 100 billion pills distributed in the U.S. from 06 to 14, that was us. So we were able to create a red flag system on top of ARCOS, and that identified the orders that should have been popped along the way with due diligence on them. We were able to implement that or include that into our litigation, showing what the defendants could have done along the way to prevent this epidemic. So we've been a huge part of that distributor case. Our firm and our group of firms, Paul Farrell out of West Virginia, and Barron and Budd, along with our shop, Levin Papatonio Rafferty.
In a case like this, what's the general approach of the defense counsel for the corporations? And my question is really tailored at this. Is it a defense that is substantive that the average person could understand, or is it a defense that's basically miring you in technicalities and obscurity?
It's both. The technicalities and the obscurities are typically at the motion practice level, and depending on whether the case is tried in front of a jury or a judge, it's primarily finger pointing, where you started the show off with pointing at doctors and pointing at patients and blaming everyone besides looking in the mirror. And that's what's really cool about this settlement agreement that we're taking into our clients. At least the distributors have tried to address the mess that they participated in creating, and are looking in the mirror saying, what can we do? It's a long-term problem. We need to have a long-term solution. We've got other defendants that are distributors like Walgreens and CVS and Walmart that had even better visibility than the distributors, because they were distributors and pharmacies. So if they were getting shipments from three different distributors, that Walgreens could see every one of them. And so they're still finger pointing and not trying to come to the table and see what they can do to be part of the solution. So it's going to take everybody looking in the mirror, figuring out what they could have done better and contributing to the solution, rather than this continued, the reason why we're here is because of the DEA, or it's because of the doctors,
right,
or because of the victims. I mean, blaming the DEA is ridiculous. It's like blaming the police officer for getting a speeding ticket. I mean, but they're throwing everything but the kitchen sink on the defense side.
When we covered the proposed settlement a few days ago, which is this total of 26 billion, 21 plus 5 for the different parties involved, I got a bunch of emails, 10 or 12 emails from viewers saying, hey, to the extent that this is going to compensate some victims, that's great. But in terms of holding these companies accountable in a way where they say, wow, that almost took us down, we can't do that again, that it's not effective, they say, because these companies price in the fact that at some point this is potentially going to happen. It's just sort of like a probability curve. And they say, over the next 20 years, we should consider that there's going to be some number of billions of dollars that we may have to pay out. We've already got that calculated in, and it's not ultimately going to affect us or force us to change our behavior. What do you say to that?
Those are great questions. Your viewers are entirely correct. Quite frankly, it's the way our whole system works. And there isn't personal accountability at the corporate level that if they get caught, essentially the stockholders, the shareholders pay these fines.
Right.
No one pays them. So it is short-term. The whole system's designed to drive short-term profits up. So senior level management, options package and stock packages, their compensation levels soar, and then push the problem and the liability further down the timeline for the shareholders to pay. Until we start holding people accountable, so they pay these fines and they're personally accountable, and heaven forbid we actually send somebody to jail, we won't see conduct changes. Now, this is one of the things that's cool about this settlement is that the settlement includes game-changing conduct requirements that are transformative. We will see meaningful change within this supply chain industry, so this won't happen again. It's not going to be overnight, but we will see fixes. And this money is also not going to coffers to fix potholes or go to fill budget deficits. Almost 90% of these settlement proceeds are being used to treat the opiate epidemic, which is also very, very important. So the money's going to fix the problem, and then there's conduct changes that will prevent this from happening again.
Last question. What's the timing of, it's being referred to as a proposed settlement right now. When might we actually see the money start to change hands?
Well, one of the things that we negotiated was an accelerated payment. So the first payment's going into escrow this year in August, September of this year. It will stay in escrow until we reach critical mass, and critical mass is just sign on from an approval from the cities and counties across the country. On the timeline, I see that happening right at the beginning of next year. So first quarter of next year, the cities and counties will receive two payments, one for 2021 and one for 2022. They'll get the second payment in July. And by July of 2023, they'll have their third payment. So within 18 months from January 2022 to July of 2023, the first three payments will come in the door, which will be a catalyst to really make some meaningful change.
Yeah, for the speed at which we're used to these things moving, that seems quite reasonable, I guess, is what I would say. We've been speaking with Peter Mougey, an attorney, senior partner at Levin Papantonio Rafferty. Peter, great to speaking with you today, and glad to see that this is moving forward.
Thanks, David. Appreciate you having me.
If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind-the-scenes videos, the Daily Bonus Show, the commercial-free Daily Show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. All right, I want to talk about not one, but two different apparent financial scams that we've learned about over the last 24 to 48 hours. I've told you now many times it is going to take months, if not years, to learn the full scope of the grifting and scamming and wrongdoing of the former administration, and the financial aspect of that are a big piece of it. Let's start with part one, Donald Trump's presidential salary. We are still learning more and more about the different lies around Trump's finances. Donald Trump is reportedly worth about $2 billion. I know there are claims that it's like 4 or 5. The best guess is he is worth about $2 billion. The presidential salary is about $400,000. Okay. We now have reason to believe that Donald Trump, despite promising to donate his presidential salary, that he did not donate the last 6 months of salary, about $200,000. Now, remember, he pledged to donate his full salary. He said, I don't need the money. I'm doing this for the betterment of the country. Yeah. So I'm going to be donating my salary to federal agencies. There's a new Washington Post report which finds that there is no evidence that Donald Trump actually did that with his salary for the last 6 months in office as president. For the first 3.5 years of his presidency, he donated the money to federal agencies. The Washington Post said it surveyed all major federal agencies, and none of them reported receiving a donation from Trump from the point starting in July of 2020, the last 6 months of his presidency. The paper said it was unable to account for that last $200,000+ of Trump's salary that was supposedly going to be donated. His last known gift was to the National Park Service in July, according to government documents. So I think the explanation for what happened here is very, very simple. We know that as Donald Trump's one-term presidency went on, Trump was more and more agitated about not getting more positive coverage for the fact that he was donating his salary. I think Trump got sick of the fact that he wasn't getting the coverage he wanted. Trump is both cheap and greedy. So he said, if my salary donation isn't buying me any positive media coverage, I'll just keep the money. That would be very on brand for Trump. I don't think we have to look very far for a sensible explanation. Also, by the way, making it extra bizarre that Trump apparently didn't donate the last 6 months of salary is that, remember, it wasn't, I have enough money, so I'm going to stop making money and do the presidency, but donate my salary and just make nothing for these 4 years. Trump kept making money while he was president. He reportedly made $1.6 billion over those 4 years, meaning that even the salary he donated is like 0.1% of what he made. And he still apparently didn't donate the full salary despite his promise. Now, I think it's important to mention, just to be thorough, the Washington Post clarified we were unable to verify Trump's donations, and we did not get a response when we asked for comment. It's theoretically possible that he donated it somewhere and we don't know where and we just can't track it down. It's possible. But again, the point is he had been doing it to federal agencies, reporting it. There were disclosures. There was documentation. The paper trail stops with 6 months left to go. The paper went to Trump's business and asked about it. They went to the former lawyer who helped arrange the donations. Nobody responded. OK, now, also, some may not know Trump continues to receive a pension of $220,000 a year as a former president as well. So there are people who wrote to me and said, David, this is a sign that Trump is broke. I actually doubt it. That would make keeping the money more logical. Certainly, if Trump was broke, it would make sense to keep that last $200,000. Trump's not likely broke. And that's what actually makes the story even wackier. Trump, the fact that he is so cheap despite being a $2 billionaire is actually even more stunning than Trump somehow ending up broke. But no, he made $1.6 billion during his 4 years in the White House. I don't think he's broke. But there is an even bigger scam. OK, and we're going to talk about this in a moment. Donald Trump has now raised somewhere between $70 and $80 million from his followers on the promise that the money was going to be used to fight the election results, to fund audits, to fund recounts, to fund lawsuits and investigations to try to overturn the election and put Trump back in power. The latest report is that none of the money, the 70 or 75 or 80 or 82 million that was donated for that reason, none of it actually was used by Trump for the things he claimed he was raising the money for. And of course, on the tail end of it, his supporters won't actually care. He could walk up to one of them on Fifth Avenue and shoot them, and they would cheer and assume that it was secretly Antifa or something like that. And what I want to talk about next is a new report that not only did Donald Trump not use the 70 or 80 million for what he said he was going to use it for, there are new disclosures which show that Donald Trump funneled those donations into his personal businesses. Let's talk about that next. So financial scam story number one is Trump said he would be donating his presidential salary. Washington Post can find no evidence that the last 6 months of his salary were actually donated. The next piece of the financial scam is that it is now believed Donald Trump moved donated money donated to fight the unfair election results, to his own businesses, according to new filings. Check out this article by Greg Graziosi, which says Donald Trump moved more than 200, I guess it's supposed to be 200,000, 20,000, 200,000 dollars donated to his Make America Great Again PAC into his own private business accounts, according to an analysis of his federal filings. The money was moved in February, a month after Trump left office. Money donated to PACs is meant to be spent solely on campaign efforts. Forbes reports that the former president also set up a leadership PAC generally used to support other candidates. That's the PAC where he said, I will tell you who the good Republicans are. Donate to me and I'll distribute the money as I see fit. Trump took $30 million from his Make America Great Again PAC and moved it to the new PAC called Save America. That PAC eventually grew to $90 million, and Trump took an additional $79,000 out of that PAC for his own uses. Trump's business, the Trump Org, regularly interacted with his campaign PACs. In one instance, the Trump Org charged his campaign PAC $38,000 to rent via Trump Tower Commercial LLC, of which Trump is 100% owner. During 2016, Trump ran his campaign out of the skyscraper, but his 2020 campaign was partially run from D.C. Despite this, the Trump Organization continued to collect rent for Trump Tower. In total, the Trump Organization collected $188,000 in rent between January and June, all paid through Trump's campaign donations. Trump restaurants also collected rent from the PAC even after the former president left office, and during a time when tourists visiting Trump Tower were few due to the coronavirus pandemic, totaling $15,000. And it just goes on and on. Save America, the leadership PAC, paid Trump Hotel Collection $79,000 after Trump was out of office. Expenses largely for lodging and meals. The Trump Organization did not comment on the self-dealing payments, but the former president did issue a statement boasting that his affiliated committees have approximately $100 million of cash ready for use. The statement said these fundraising numbers, coupled with tremendous support in so many other ways, show that President Trump supporters want him to continue to fight. We knew that the PAC, Save America PAC, we knew the entire donate so that we can fight the election results. We told you it was a grift back in December, January, February. If you looked at the fine print when they were sending out the fundraising emails, it would say we can use up to 50 cents of every dollar donated to pay off campaign debts, for example. This is really, it's almost like a political version of The Producers. And I still go back to the idea that Trump's entire 2016 primary run was really just a way to make money and get publicity and become more well-known, and then monetize it after losing the Republican primary, or certainly after losing the election. But Trump overestimated, apparently, the intelligence of his own electorate, of the Republican Party electorate. And when you do that, weird things can happen. And the weird thing that happened was that the Republican electorate was actually ignorant enough and radical enough to vote Trump to be their nominee. And his followers still to this day believe he was draining the swamp or whatever it was. So again, it's just like with Trump's salary. This amount of money should really be meaningless to Trump, like 79 grand into the Trump Tower restaurants and 20 grand or 100 grand or 188 in rent. These are amounts of money that should be meaningless to a guy like Trump, who even by the conservative estimates has $2 billion. But it's greedy, cheap, and narcissistic. And what will his followers say? Probably nothing. That's the reality. If you go to his followers, they will say, listen, this is a guy with, why would he go to some crappy restaurant when he has his own restaurants where he can hold campaign events? Why would he rent some office when he owns so much real estate? It makes sense that he would do this. They will defend him to the last day. It was a grift from day one, and the financial documents seem to support it. Will there be consequences for self-dealing? Probably not. Probably not. But it is certainly the type of thing where if it were Democrats doing this, it would be 24/7 on Fox News. It's not even a story on right-wing media, though. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a really good question about the right and the pandemic. Beautifully asked. Take a listen to this.
Yeah. Hey, David. This is Troy calling from Georgia.
Yeah.
I just had a question for you that I don't think I've ever seen anybody ask, people that are against vaccine and mask mandates.
Yeah.
I've always wanted somebody to ask the opposing side, well, what is it that you want our government to do to fight this pandemic?
Nothing.
Because I haven't heard any other suggestions of what we could do other than mask up and try to get everybody vaccinated.
Yep.
Do they want to just let this thing run rampant?
Yeah. This is a great question, right? So you're against the government saying what should happen in schools. Let schools and parents figure it out. You're against government saying you got to wear masks. You're against government saying you got to get vaccinated to work here, to work there, to go here, there, to travel in this particular way. You're against businesses having capacity limits. They want to leave it to the business to decide, leave it to the people to say, oh, I want to go to this business or I don't. Everybody will just kind of make their own decisions. This is the point. They don't want anything to be done. Many of them never believed it was serious enough to have anything done involving the government. Many of them believe that anything government does is overreach. And yet now they're okay with government passing a ban on mask mandates. And so it's completely hypocritical, but you have to understand their framing is it should be freedom. Leave it to people and businesses to figure out, except once a business says, well, you've got to wear a mask to come in or you've got to be vaccinated to come in. Then they want to pass laws that say, no, you can't do that. Ban mask mandates. Ban vaccine requirements to do business. So it's the wrong approach. This is sort of like when we say, aren't Republicans going to be punished for obstructing everything Democrats want to do? No. The obstruction is a feature. If your worldview is, I don't want government doing anything, or I want government doing as little as possible, you see obstruction by government officials as a feature rather than a bug. They are doing the thing you want them to do. They are preventing government from doing stuff. And so, of course, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, extraordinarily dangerous. And we see how it's worked out for the United States. And particularly when you look at the red states now, or the red counties now, case rates growing at twice the rate in red counties as in blue counties. It has failed completely. It's a perfect question. If not masks, if not vaccines, if not, how do they think government should be involved in fighting this pandemic? Many of them believe government should not be involved. And that's a horrifying thing. And most of them would concede. Even small government conservatives would tend to concede government should keep us safe from threats. The threat doesn't have to be a military threat from another country. It doesn't have to be a cyber threat from another country or bad actors. It can be a medical threat, a public health threat. And that's exactly what it is. So you have to really get into their mindset to understand they want the government doing nothing. They don't think the government should be involved. We have a great bonus show for you today. We're going to talk about what's in the infrastructure bill, what's actually in the bill that is going to be debated in the Senate. We will talk about how 1 million Texans have registered to vote online since a court ruling said you can register to vote online. We will also talk about new McDonald's policy. Every employee must wear a mask. Every customer must wear a mask. There are McDonald's addicts who also hate masks who are going crazy. What will they do? Will they go to Burger King? Will they go to Wendy's? Will they maybe make a salad? We will talk about all of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Get instant access by signing up right now. I mean, it's truly instant, the speed of light, at joinpacman.com. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.